Monday, I'm flying straight over there.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Alexander van der Putte, and today we're going to have a panel from high school to the boardroom. And this panel is managed through the EdTech Forum, which is part of the AIFC and the Astana Finance Days. The EdTech Forum is managed through the BCPD, the Bureau for Continuous Professional Development. And I happen to be the chairman of the board, so I'm very pleased also to moderate this particular panel with people that I mostly know very well, or at least I have a direct affiliation with. So let me introduce our panelists, and I will do it in alphabetical order. First of all, we have Vikas Agarwal, and he's with ACCA. He's the Regional Head of Policy Emerging Markets. ACCA is also one of our partner institutions at the BCPD. Then we have Jochen Berdler. Am I saying this correctly, Jochen? Managing Partner Kazakhstan with McKinsey & Company. And by the way, Jochen, congratulations with your election as Senior Partner with McKinsey. I saw that on LinkedIn. And then we have Professor Pamela Bernard, Professor of Arts, Creativities and Educations at, I would, but I'm biased of course, I would say the best university in the world, and that's the University of Cambridge. And I have already one supporter on the panel here. Sorry, Romano, but although Bologna is the oldest, it's not anymore the best. Sorry.
No, I know that.
I like to pull Romano Prodi's leg from time to time. He can manage it. And then we have Richard Rumbelow, who we meet for the first time. Hello, Richard. He's Director with International Affairs and Export Services with makeuk.org. Well, one thing already that is very clear from the panelists, that we all share a common objective, and that basically is the development of people. And that comes very close to our heart. And that's in essence what this panel is all about. So a very quick word on the BCPD. The BCPD wants to help already pupils in mid-school and high school to help them make choices about their future career. And today that's far from easy. And that's one of the things we're going to be exploring in today's session. But we not only work through the Learn pillar with pupils and their parents, but also through the Develop pillar, we actually work with professionals, young professionals, but also more experienced professionals, because also they have to make choices about how they're going to remain relevant in the future. And as the title of our session refers to, from high school to the boardroom, that doesn't mean that everybody will end up in the boardroom. And that's based on competencies, but it's also based on choices. By the way, if you hear Russian, please select at the bottom of the screen English, where you see the little globe at the bottom of the Zoom, next to reactions. There you can select the language because there's simultaneous translation. So let me start immediately with the first question. And that's a more holistic question about what is happening in the external environment. What are some of the major forces affecting the future of work? And let me start with Vikas, then Jochen, then Pamela, and then Richard, in that order to start with. Vikas, what do you think is happening in the world that affects the future of work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I could just talk for an hour on that on my own, I think. It's easy to say technology, but I think I'm sure technology will come up quite a lot. I think one thing that's really important to look at is actually how people are changing and accordingly changing the world of work. You know, we've got a new generation coming into workforce, Generation Z, and they are incredibly different, and they are demanding businesses change their behaviours, and in turn that is changing how they work, what they're doing, how they operate. And you end up with multi-generational workplaces. It's potentially 3 or 4 generations in one workplace, having to try and manage the conflicts that creates, but also actually capitalise on the opportunities. We also see, sort of globalisation is changing business. It's making it much easier to move businesses from place to place, to bring in talent from other locations. And we're also seeing, again, sort of consumer demand change. These are just very high-level points, but because consumers are demanding new types of products, they want it instantaneously, it means business models have to change as well, right? So that's impacting what people do and how they do it within businesses. There are obviously numerous other issues, numerous other factors at play in terms of changing the world of work. Obviously, developing areas like sustainability, that is impacting how business operates as much as anything else. I can keep going, but it just depends on. I'm sure there's a lot more to cover later on.
Well, I think that's an excellent list to start with. So I hear technology, I hear consumer preferences. I also hear things about Gen Z. Jochen, anything to add to this already good list to start with?
Yeah, I let me maybe dive a little bit deeper in the technology part and the big picture. In McKinsey, we have the McKinsey Global Institute, and we very closely monitor the future of work, and we do regularly studies on that. And what we actually see is, first of all, there will be actually more workplaces. It will be a kind of transition. It will be a difficult transition, but overall, what we can expect is actually that the employment will go up from currently roughly, let's say, 2.5 billion workforce to maybe 3.5 billion. But there will be actually a downward trend and an upward trend. And technology will actually lead to a lot of obsolescence in some of the jobs. And in terms of technology, it's connectivity, right? The Internet of Things, it's analytics, it's robotization, it is process digitization, and then also the whole, let's say, mobile infrastructure that actually will make processes much more effective. But then this will lead maybe to 400, 500, 600 million jobs disappearing. But on the other side, we have actually new jobs appearing. The global macro trends will actually lead to additional new employment opportunities. We need to develop a lot of infrastructure. We see the energy transition. We see also rising, increasing aging in the population. All those trends will actually lead to new employment opportunities, and in the end, we will see actually more jobs, right? But it's not a linear trend. It's actually a downward and upward, and we need to manage going forward this kind of transformation of the workforce very well.
It's interesting what you mentioned, Jochen, because the conventional wisdom is very often that the fourth industrial revolution will destroy more jobs than actually it does create. However, you bring an interesting perspective, and that's basically you have to do creative destruction before actually you can rebuild the new, kind of, and that in the end there will be more jobs, but there will be very different jobs. Pamela, is that
Yes.
You do a lot of research in this area as well, so we would love to hear from a leading academic on this field.
Thank you, and thank you for welcoming me and inviting me today. It's so important to talk about these issues. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you very well. Please continue.
What is happening is a revisioning together globally with educators. They're rethinking what is the future and what is the future of education. What is education for? And the 21st century, of course, has always required, every century has required a rethink. But this century, with a pandemic, with climate change, with globalization, issues and all of the elements that we've just spoken about. Change is happening faster, and students are entering a workforce where jobs are not guaranteed. Research tells us that about 60% of future occupations have yet to be developed, and that 40% of 5-year-olds will need to be self-employed. That's an amazing stat. Children are not all the same, no matter where they are in the globe. Lockdown has had a massive effect on their lives, but in different and contrasting ways. For teachers, of which there is they're leaving the profession in a radically crisis way. In the 21st century, although teaching is an inspiring journey, it's of a vocation, people are kind of called to this profession, but it's increasingly complex. And we're educating children and young people to be positive, healthy, engaged, active, global citizens with a moral compass, but prepared for uncertainty and the societal challenges that we're facing. We need, and we're seeing, a rethink of the pipeline model of education. Loads of students are unhappy doing STEM for STEM's sake, and now incorporating arts into STEM to create STEAM. We're pushing against that and saying that transdisciplinary education needs to mirror real-world practices in the workforce. Onto the workforce, we're seeing radical changes. I used to speak about my last point. I used to speak and research portfolio careers. And then that was advanced to a second form of career, which is protean. And then boundaryless, where you jump field. So you get a lot of people going into game industry, taking with them a number of disciplines and creating, new transdisciplinary innovations as a collaborative workforce. But now we're seeing wiggly careers, which is an interesting metaphor. And so, yes, technology, digital technology, mobilize that 3D, 4D practices in education that I'm seeing coming out of Finland and South Korea in really exciting ways, who are leading, I think, in terms of educational innovation, posing questions around what are the pathways, the transitions and the choices that we need to be giving young people so that they can have a sustainable future, and indeed that education is actually about futures, not getting them ready for work because we don't know what that's going to look like, but actually creating future-making education.
Future-making education. Interesting what you mentioned, Pamela, because, I read, of course, your work that you're also doing with the University of Edinburgh on STEAM, and also what you refer to, that more and more graduates will have to create their own company. I've been teaching in business schools for the past 20 years, and increasingly I see that upon graduation, and not just from an MBA program, but also from a BBA program, graduates immediately start their business. It's truly fascinating, and it's a clear trend that I have been seeing. I guess also that the barriers to entrepreneurship are probably lowered with technology. That may be another factor that plays into it, but also what Vikas mentioned. Gen Z, they're very different. For the first time, I taught in the BBA program during lockdown, and it was Gen Zs. And Vikas knows about this because we discussed that together, but they're very, very different. And they're much more eager to, let's say, navigate their own future as opposed to my generation, for example. Richard, last but not least, but you will talk obviously from an industry association perspective, and that will, I believe, bring also some very good insights. Please, Richard.
Thank you, Alexandra, and good afternoon, panel. Delighted to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Make UK, we are the representative trade body for manufacturing and engineering here in the UK. We are one of the big 5 trade associations here, and we specialise and focus on our efforts around the manufacturing sector. So we're very close to some of those changes which are taking place and which other panellists have already referred to. In my sort of opening remarks, and I associate myself with the majority of the comments which have already been said, and not to therefore repeat, I think there are some wider changes which are taking place which will affect the future of work. It's slightly been referred to already, but I do think the long tail impact of the pandemic on economic vitality, where that growth is going to come from, we're only at the start of that journey. We don't know how and in what way the long tail of this will affect patterns of work, viability of work. What we do know is that it's probably accelerating a lot of change and will fast track a lot of change which we had assumed perhaps would happen in 10 years' time. It's probably going to happen a lot sooner than that. And I think that that is something that firms and government in terms of policymakers need to reflect on when it comes to inspiring people to come into business and come into work, and give them the toolkits that they need to help them at least build up the capacity and knowledge about what they wish to do. The second thing, of course, is that global trade has also got an impact on this as well. Now, clearly the pandemic will affect global trade patterns in the near future, but we have already seen over the last 10 years and since the financial crisis a lack of confidence in the way in which global trade has happened, and we've seen in general terms a lowering of trade in terms of global presence. And I think that therefore to build successful economies, to build the right entrepreneurship amongst our fellow and future leaders, to build that future of work requires the world to get back onto a positive step where global trade is concerned. And I think that the pandemic has the ability of doing that, and particularly looking at new avenues of trade which potentially link in with Generation Z's ambitions in terms of some of its key wish list of things to do, whether that is in e-commerce, whether it's in digital technology more broadly, whether it's about sustainability, green ambitions, etc. So I think that though global trade has suffered, I think there is an opportunity for it to grow further. The long tail effects of COVID has the positive aspect of supporting that, and I think for the new leaders coming through in the future, that is something that we need to focus on. I know we're going to talk later in terms of what does that look like in terms of skills and ambitions and giving that generation confidence, but for us it is about encouraging that group of people into our sector being energised by the opportunity that manufacturing brings in a future sense is important, but also to ensure that as businesses we are geared up to allow for that to happen. And I think there's still a bit of a way to go in terms of ensuring that the manufacturing environment of the future reflects that ambition, both in terms of the type of product, but also in terms of providing the digital skills, the digital capability of enhancing and supporting some of that ambition.
Great. Well, and you brought up COVID-19. Imagine that COVID-19 would have happened 10 years ago. I think our economy would have been way more affected than it is today. Technology largely helped many economies and also universities to actually stay online. I also heard from many of the panelists here at least 2 words: inclusiveness, but also sustainability. So I hope we can actually explore that a little bit later with the next few questions. And I propose to actually combine question 2 and 3. Question 2 is, what competencies are needed in the future to remain relevant and avoid obsolescence, and which jobs will be most in demand? Jochen, you already alluded to it to some degree, but let me start with you, please.
I start with the competencies, and then maybe leave the other parts for the other panelists. I would actually structure this the competencies in 3 buckets. Right? I would actually talk about more like technical skills, but then also human skills and soft skills. But then also what I find actually most interesting and most relevant, some meta skills. I think in all 3 areas we see certain shifts and requirements going forward. On the technical skills, I would say actually everything related to the technological trends that we see is of course super relevant. Analytics, but also then how we come up with new solutions. Elements like agile development, design thinking, I believe are actually very relevant as technical skills going forward, and everyone should actually be familiar and know those areas. I mean, even myself, I try right now to educate myself in big data, because I think I cannot manage to my pension, without knowing what it is about. So that I would cluster in the technical areas, but then also I believe there will be new requirements in the soft skills. I actually be a strong believer that the social intelligence becomes more relevant. Being able to operate in cross-functional agile teams requires that, to come up quickly with new solutions, new prototypes, minimal viable products. The whole creativity part, I believe, also in a world that is more uncertain, that requires adaptability, I believe creativity plays an enormous role. But then if we go to the meta skills, which I believe actually is most important, and where I believe historically many educational systems failed, need to be radically developed. And what I mean here is the aspect of lifelong learning, being already as a young person aware that you cannot stop. I mean, education no longer is the first 20, 25 years in your life. It's actually during your whole life, being ready that you will have to have certain jobs, many different jobs during your career, being actually able to self-direct yourself, to shape your career, not go with the flow, taking early on decisions to change. And then also, last but not least, being actually comfortable with change and uncertainty, and accepting that as a concept in today's world, and taking it as an opportunity and not as a threat. And I believe that's if I look back into my education, that's something that I'm missing, and that I'm trying actually right now to provide to my kids, right? Because in my times I was not learning about the global trends in school, right? I was forced to receive knowledge and information, but I was not getting prepared for the future challenges that I would face as an adult. And I believe that's something we have to give to the next generation.
Well, and same with me, and I guess it was the same with Richard and Pamela as well, maybe to a lesser degree with Vikas. But Pamela, you refer to that basically universities tend to shy away from interdisciplinary learning. They typically tend to focus on silos. But you believe it's changing, right? And how will that actually help to address some of the competencies that are going to be needed that, for example, Jochen referred to?
Yeah, great question. There are pockets of excellence, which is the usual thing. There are practices, there are programs that work transdisciplinarily with STEAM, with diverse creativity. Which creativity are you educating for? Of course we need mathematics creativity, scientific creativity, artistic creativity. But when you look at this, the iPhone, the smartphone, this is transdisciplinary. This represents STEAM in every respect. And, a vision where you see the arts and sciences, come together as logics of knowing that are connected, that need to be reconnected. So, the idea of purposefully connecting arts and sciences, as in the manner of putting things together to create a finished product, how they interact and how they stimulate different forms of logic, rationalities, affects, and solutions is key. Now, when you look at skills for the 21st century, of course, creativity is there, but it's still not saying creativities. Which creativities are we educating for? We should be educating for multiple creativities. Even looking at creative thinking skills, it involves, faster thinking, learning, multidimensionality, being reflexive, open and sifting ideas and refining ideas and discovering possibilities, constructing new ideas. But it's still not interacting and making specific the interaction with knowledges. And this is the key thing, knowledges. There isn't a singular knowledge where we're in a society where the economy is about knowledges and knowing and developing new knowledges. So multiple creativities matter, my first point. When it comes to transdisciplinarity, this is authoring new modalities, inviting invention, new thinking. When one thinks of social entrepreneurs who address social, cultural and environmental problems, most of those social entrepreneurs are working in transdisciplinary framing. So it is, I think, the way to go in terms of innovation and business optimism. Startup rates are increasing, as you were saying before, and that is an important point. But I'm going to get to the next one, my final one, and that is we need to be actually putting on your governors' boards young people, children even. We are seeing in the University of Cambridge primary schools where second-year architects spend a week in the primary school. First-year engineers spend a week in this primary school, sitting next to children, talking to children, learning with children, learning from children. And it's incredible, the ideas that children have. And we're seeing sort of movement of young people's ideas really bringing a new moral compass to the needs of society. So whose voice are we listening to in order to revision and how to think transdisciplinary, the notion of STEAM, when you consider Leonardo da Vinci, who had no division of disciplines. He was an inventor, an artist, a scientist, exploring all subjects simultaneously. And I think he is someone to hold up. Who are our role models that we're actually putting out there as the people who we want young people and children, very young children, to be seen?
Brilliant, super. And just for your reference, you were talking about listening and learning from younger people. When I was at World Economic Forum, we developed medium-term scenarios on the digital ecosystem. And I'm talking about almost 15 years ago. It was in 2006. It's exactly 15 years ago. And we went to Japan and we went to South Korea. And there we interviewed teenagers. And we asked them, describe us your perfect device. And we learned a lot from that. We believe that our scenarios were therefore substantially more plausible and internally consistent for that reason. We see a similar movement actually happening in boardrooms. Basically, age becomes a key important factor to have truly diverse boards as well. And some companies are even creating shadow boards composed of younger, non-executive, non-executive employees. Yes, indeed. The next question: which jobs will be in demand? And that's a question for first Richard and then Vikas. But then maybe from a different perspective, an industry association, and then maybe also from a professional body perspective. Richard, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, the conversation we've had so far. I think it's touched on a lot of the change that is going to take place. I think in terms of the sort of jobs that are going to be in demand in the future, I think there are some things. First of all, that there's some architectural things that need to happen first. I think, first of all, it's very important that policymakers ensure that a lot of the control of the skills necessary in a modern workplace is actually devised and undertaken by the employers themselves, not to have it dictated necessarily in terms of strict structures as to how it's going to be done. Allow the employee and the employer to work out what that skills base is, give the employer the skills and the ability to learn those things on the job. And also, to a certain extent, I would add that I think the employers are best placed to know the type of skills and the type of things they need to have in their workplace to make them agile in the future. So I think there needs to be a rebalance and an understanding by policymakers that historical interventions probably aren't the way forward in the future. The second thing I would add is that I think it's also very important for individuals to take a greater responsibility for the type of work and the type of skills they want to own themselves, whether that is through their own efforts or whether through the efforts of an employer. I think it's going to be very important for individuals to take the responsibility. The self-management bit is going to be important, personal agility that brings, embracing a range of skills, both technical, soft skills and other things to make it important. But I think there's going to be a greater onus on individual skills and individual responsibility in this as well. And the last thing I will say is about employers. I think we in manufacturing recognise that there is a lot more work to do when it comes to embracing and accepting the technological change which is taking place, making sure that you are best placed to work when it comes to the adoption of some of those more modern technologies. Make it a strategic imperative to ensure that the modern forms of industrial digital technology you're adopting, putting those in best practice, and make sure that is an integral cultural aspect of what you do as well as a business imperative of what you're doing as well. So those are three things. Policymakers give the ability for individuals and companies to define what they want, not top down. Second, personal responsibility for individuals. And thirdly, from a manufacturing point of view, increase the rate of adoption of technology in the workplace, the adoption of industrial digital technology, embrace it as a culture, embrace it as part of a performance measure and productivity gain as well.
Well, and to some degree, although mentioned in very different words, not that very different from what Jochen mentioned, lifelong learning, but also getting used to uncertainty. And embrace uncertainty, turn uncertainty in an opportunity. Jochen, it's a PhD that you're going to do in data science, right, Jochen? Which is great, by the way. Lifelong learning, I never stop learning. I'm now in two programs. One is actually, Pamela, at the other place. We refer to a certain university, which is a little bit older than Cambridge, to the other place. And it's similar to Jochen. It's, in my case, it's in artificial intelligence. So I want to learn about these new skills, but also about the ethics of artificial intelligence. Vikas.
Yeah, look, I was going to add just to the competency front. I think there are two. I think empathy is something it might not be a competency, but I think we need to ensure that people remain or sort of ensure their empathy, because as we start to automate things, we lose that human to human interface. Certainly in parts of our lives and our professional lives as well. So recognizing human emotion and accounting for it, and also putting yourself in sort of thinking about people that may be excluded by new technology solutions, right? This is going to become a big issue as we start digitally excluding people. And the other element, as you just said, is ethics. And ethics comes from diversity, right? In understanding other people, different positions in life and society, and whether it's gender, race, physical ability, neurological differences. If you don't understand how those people operate and exist, or you don't include them in your design process, you're at risk of creating incredibly unethical situations. And actually that tends to where the new job's going to come from, right? You need, across a number of areas, you need ethicists within all sorts of businesses, not just AI, but everything else. People that are really sort of looking at the implications of the transformation internally with their business, but also externally. You know, how are you impacting on society, on the environment, on sort of certain social fabrics? Sustainability in its broadest sense is going to be important for the future. I think as we are making a slow but sort of steady shift towards recognizing the impact of our what we do on the planet, helping businesses to become more sort of part of the circular economy is going to be kind of important. But also actually just thinking about sustainability in the broader sense. So ensuring that your business stays alive in the future. I think if you took a cut of you know, the FTSE 100 or other exchanges, I wonder how many of them are still going to be viable in, say, 100 years. Right? A lot of those businesses, if they don't change, will no longer be sustainable, either because of what they do, how they operate, how they engage with their customers, how they perform in terms of climate change and everything else. I don't know if anyone's seen, there's just been a scandal today with one of the big oil companies. It's worth checking out. I won't say who it is, but it's worth having a look at that. Data, I mean, it's been talked again. We create so much data, but it's really thinking about, you know, finance professions and accountants, it's understanding how to use that data. There's data in everything that we do. It doesn't have to be in finance, doesn't have to be in engineering or anything else. But it's useless until you do something with it, you analyze it, right? And then sort of bringing everything to everything everyone said already is around transformation. And this is about using creativity, vision, you know, your arts, trying to find new solutions to change other people's businesses, you know, to change business models, to change outputs, ways of operating, and making businesses sort of, you know, supporting businesses to grow, whether it's domestically or internationally. Those are the sorts of areas. It's not about number crunching. It's not about data entry anymore. All of that is being automated, and rightly so. That's not high value work. We need to appreciate it, but actually that's where being like the strategic advisor to businesses is where we should be moving.
Well, I'm happy that you brought up the ethics as well. Tomorrow we going to have a panel that I will be moderating on a book chapter that I just finished. It's Corporate Governance 4.0 emerging. And I refer to Corporate Governance 4.0 as one that is more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. And there is an area of that we're looking into, and that's AI. And the question is, what kind of board oversight can be provided to make sure that AI does not dramatically accelerate inequity in terms of gender and race? And obviously that's a very important aspect to be looked at from a board perspective as well. If you look at technology, it has great benefits, but potentially also unintentional consequences. So what advice, and I'm going to start with Jochen because he gave it away already before. He has children and he's talking to them about their own future. But this is a question to start with for Jochen. What advice would you give to adolescents and also their parents? What advice would you give yourself, in essence, about the educational choices they should make? Jochen, please.
Oh, that's a very interesting and time-consuming topic. I mean, you know, when in earlier times at parties, you know, you were discussing the latest, I don't know, trends in sports, in fashion. I think nowadays, as a parent, wherever you show up at the dinner, the topic after 10 minutes, it shifts to education of your kids because it's the topic that most parents are concerned about, right? And so if I think about it, I think number one is investing into education is, I think, the first and most important decision to take. I mean, if you look, I mean, there's a clear correlation between educational level and the risk of facing kind of no longer being relevant in the labor market. So I would say the first very important kind of decision and being aware of that investing into education is very important, and it will provide a huge payback. I think for parents it's the most important investment to take, actually. The second that I would actually highlight is and communicate to kids and young students is, I mean, follow your passion, follow, your purpose. I think nowadays everything is possible. Given technology and access to the world, I think it never ever was so easy to grow to something relevant, important, and to be significant in this world. I mean, let's just take the recent Grammy winner from Kazakhstan, Imran Bek, right? I mean, he used to be a railroad employee in the regions, and now he's a superstar on a global level. And only because he never gave up, he never was encouraged, never believing in what others told him. He followed his passion, and now he is influencing music trends. So I think that's something to convey to young people. Follow your passion. Everything is possible. The next topic, I believe, is early on having the discussions with kids about what it is, to work, to somehow be in the labor market. What does it take to be relevant? What kind of opportunities exist? What kind of trends? I think, again, here nowadays, many educational systems, they deprioritize and don't see the importance. I think just getting access to professionals early on, learning about opportunities, different sectors, different professions is extremely important, so that kids can make an educated decision what they really want. The next I would actually say is about this lifelong learning, preparing kids and students that this is a journey and it's not a chapter. Actually, it's a journey for the whole life. Being aware of uncertainties, being aware of disruptions, and embracing the change. And then last but not least, I would highlight the international perspective, where historically I think education, labor markets, they were very regional and maybe country specific. Nowadays we're talking about international labor markets, international competition. And if you think about university education, what I now observe with my kids, you need to actually start preparing not when they are turning 18, 19, when they are supposed to go to university, but you need to front load. Actually, you need to start 2-3 years earlier, because the international competition for getting accepted in some of the top universities is so high, so that actually you need to front load, you need to be fluent in languages, and you need to be aware of this international dimension, which early on was maybe less relevant. So these 5 topics, I mean, investing into education, following the passion and purpose, lifelong learning, early starting, and then being aware that this nowadays plays on a global level. So this would be my lessons and my recommendations that I would provide and that I'm providing to our kids.
Maybe unintentionally, Jochen has just described me. Well, I'm honestly not kidding. The passion, for example, I mentioned it to my colleagues over here. Very few people know it. I was paralyzed for 4 years before I graduated from high school. I therefore graduated from high school at the age of 23. I graduated from university at the age of 29. I now have 3 PhDs. I work for McKinsey. I work for the World Economic Forum. And actually, I would say McKinsey dramatically invested in me. They believed in me. So, and thank you, McKinsey. Thank you, Jochen, and all your colleagues. But indeed, I cannot underline the importance of passion. Believe in yourself and accelerate. Pam, anything to add on this one?
Yes, thank you. All really important points. Passion, very important, and it's been theorized as emotional capital in a study I've done on women social entrepreneurs and why they led with female-only networks. Now, networks is incredibly important. social capital. That's what networks are, and we're doing that now. But actually, who are you networking with? Are you keeping navel gazing on your own business, or are you looking out beyond? And that's where young people do a lot of informal learning on the web, looking at YouTube and learning from various channels where people are teaching in a whole range of ways in different places and spaces. So let's get to this issue of education. I'm going to propose the idea of education in business needs to actually promote professional doctorates, to have in your business people who are doing professional doctorates, researching the practice of your organization. And I manage a professional doctorate a program, and there are people who are funded by, I think, the oil companies that we were thinking of before, without naming names, that are paying for a 5-year degree, research degree, of someone working for the company, but also doing a doctorate and researching, engaging in changing practice. And in this case, I'm thinking of they're always leaders. They're at the top of their game. They're not necessarily in education. They can be nurses. They can be leaders of business organizations wanting to think differently. And that's my second point, thinking differently. How do we actually engage in that thinking and doing differently? And that's where the space of an organization, whether that's a higher education institution or a business or corporate sort of setting, you need a collective space to think differently, to think critically. Critical thinking is as important as creative thinking, but they're not as important as actually having ideas and engaging in authoring change. So leadership creativity looks different to mathematical creativity, domain specific. So which creativity are you promoting in your organization to promote lifelong learning and indeed promote sustainable futures, whether that be HE, early years, secondary schools, primary schools, and indeed any other educational aspect or setting. Emotional capital is a really important concept, like social capital, cultural capital. Superstars, those that are driven, those that are passionate, and those that are successful have emotional capital to boot. And they are strong-willed, resilient, and responsive people. And I think those dispositions are also really important in how we think we work together, responsibly, with ethics at the center of all that we do. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Pamela. Vikas, I guess, I'm not 100% sure. You have children too, no? What advice? No, you don't. Okay. But you have a lot of friends who have children.
Yeah,
so,
and nieces and nephews as well, yeah.
And family, yes. Well, what advice would you give?
Yeah, look, I would. Languages come up. I think languages is incredibly important, and perhaps this might be very UK reflective, but we are not good at getting children to carry on with languages, and it's a real shame because it gives you access to an entirely other country's culture and the ability to integrate and everything else. So languages for sure. I'm with an accounting professional body. I think accounting and finance is still going to be a very valuable career. It's always going to be essential, as much as parts of it are going to become automated. If we were looking at subjects, I think the interdisciplinary idea is actually quite lovely. I think the idea, if you're doing a science-based subject, that you would do something creative alongside of it. Universities, certainly when I was there, they were quite restrictive about what external modules you could do and where you could do it, and rather than allowing you to go and do a sociology module as I studied engineering, I was only allowed to do like an architecture module, which actually is fine, but I think we've got to ensure that we're encouraging children as they grow older to love learning. I think this is what we don't do enough of, and I appreciate teachers only have a certain amount of time, but unless you have that, and what we find in our most recent study is that people that they're most attracted to the companies they work in because they have the opportunity to continue learning. And I think we need to build that into people at a much younger age, that actually when you finish school or you finish university, that's not, they shouldn't be treated as the thing you do to get the job. It should be part of your life and actually something that you love. So that's not really a proper answer to the sort of subjects that we want sort of kids to be doing. But it's more about how we teach them and getting them to think about education as not just a tick in the box, as it were.
Thank you, Vikas. Richard, I understand you have to leave. Thank you very much.
I leave very shortly, but I have a few comments to make on this particular question, if I may, before I leave. And thank you all for allowing me to join the panel. I associate myself with all the comments that have been made so far. The things I would just add to it is that we are seeing a fundamental change in how businesses operate and function. I think the old silos of certain sectors are beginning to disappear. There are cross-sectoral skills which are going to be highly important for the workplace of the future. And also, of course, there are going to be skills that we don't know exist, which will be in the future. And I think that agility, I would press on my child a number of things. Be agile in your thinking about the type of skills you want to have, but have modern skills relevant for all sectors that you think are going to be applicable to you. Secondly, I think we've touched on it, social skills are going to be highly important for the workplace, given the fact that the traditional workplace is going to change fundamentally as a result of a range of factors. We've touched on them already in terms of the forces that are going to change the nature of work. I think thirdly, it's going to open up opportunities for people who perhaps have thought themselves excluded from the work market. That may be generational, it may be lower adapting people. Certainly in terms of gender, I think it's going to embrace a lot of gendered opportunities. And lastly, in terms of the world economy, I think modern economies are going to come forward, and that will undoubtedly help them to come forward into the workplace. The last thing is about employers. There needs to be a cultural change in accepting this change is going to happen, whether it's technology on the shop floor, whether it's the way you engage with your employers in a traditional work sense or in a virtual capacity, and bring young leaders forward as early as possible, enhance their capabilities, make them the leaders of the future, and bring those skills to bear into the workplace. So I think it's those things that I would ensure that adolescents have. Don't be sector specific, get core skills, develop on those, let that take you into the sectors that you are passionate about in the future, and I think that will open up opportunities for multiple peoples in both generational as well as in terms of perhaps people generational as well as in new emerging markets as well.
Richard, thank you so much. We will definitely stay in contact and reach out to you again in the future. So hopefully we can count on your insights in the future again. Thanks so much.
Very welcome. Thank you very much to you all. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We have a last question, and I believe that all the panels are running about 20 minutes late. So we still have about 5 minutes, if that's okay with your own schedule. And that is the following. How can workers affected by technological disruption reskill themselves? It's not just technological disruption, of course. It's also changes in the way that the economy operates. Jochen referred to the energy transition, for example. How can a coal miner become a custom installer for solar panels, for example? Or how can a bus driver become someone who is involved in designing autonomous vehicles? How can some of the workers affected by technological disruption reskill themselves? Vikas, I want to start with you, because you work for a professional body, and so I guess that although it's not, let's say, a blue-collar worker, it's still the accounting profession is still affected by technological disruption.
Yeah, now I'm probably going to say something quite controversial here for certainly who I work with. But I think we have to stop treating certainly like job titles or professions like accountant or, you know, finance, whatever it might be, as the outcome. Like, that is a means to an end, right? We need to change up job titles, I think, as well, a little bit, in that the technical skills that you get from having an accounting qualification like ours, and the sort of strategic vision that you develop and all this kind of stuff goes on to so much more, gives you so many opportunities, not within the sort of traditional space. I think we have allowed ourselves to fall in over time quite fixed, rigid career paths, and actually if you're like, you need to be thinking about sort of diagonal moves, as it were. I think people struggle often to see the next. They go for the easy next step up the ladder, as it were, or they might go to the next job which has exactly the same job title, rather than looking for something else where they can apply those soft skills, the technical skills, the sort of creativity, the vision, everything else, into an entirely different field. So, you know, you talk about the coal miner. I think going to become a PV installer is a really good, example. Thinking about, I'm just trying to think of another profession where you could effectively reskill. I think one of the problems, and this is a generalization, perhaps, is that if you're thinking about older generations, you are potentially dealing with people that haven't been given the opportunity to learn as continuously as younger generations, and so you're going to have to sort of kick-start that again, and that's not easy. You know, you're talking about people that may have not been in formal education or even only sort of CPD, continuous professional development, for a long period of time. So getting them to carve out that time to relearn is the first step, and making them more comfortable and actually giving them a platform that they are comfortable with and familiar with and can use, right? They're not necessarily all going to use their tablets or their phones, whatever. So that's the first. I think that's the big step, is getting people that are potentially being automated out more comfortable with new directions and new, you know, learning again. Again, that's probably not answering the question you asked, but it's a sort of it's the how to get to the how to reskill yourself bit, I think, is the sort of important bit. Which I don't think governments are doing enough of at the moment. They're certainly not putting enough attention to an impending wave of potential redundancies in the future.
Well, that I do think you bring up some very good points. I think mindsets do matter. Let me just use one example. It was a project at McKinsey, actually, and it was in Nord-Pas-de-Calais. And we were going to close down one of the sites, but nobody was going to lose their job. We were going to move them to a different site. And the company was going to pay for any costs related to it. Nobody wanted it. They preferred to be unemployed than having to move 50 to 100 kilometers away. And this, by the way, is in an area with second-generation unemployment. In other words, children have never seen their parents work. So what is the effect then on their motivation to reskill themselves or even focus on their future career? Pamela, anything you want to add to what Vikas was saying?
Absolutely. I mean, this reskilling oneself, this is all about, you know, new career pathways, and carving out new pathways, not just taking a pathway. So when I said earlier that we used to just look at portfolio careers, that's someone holding an instrument and always holding an instrument and teaching on it or performing on it, but it's always based on that instrument or that mind, that skill set. Protean career means that you take that skill set and use it somewhere else in the industry, maybe as a sound producer, maybe as an arts administrator. So you're still sort of broadening the skill set. A boundaryless career means you jump field. So, you know, you become a coder for a gaming industry and become a sound designer and learn new skills on the job. But the squiggly career is another phenomenon again, and I think that's what we're speaking about, this adaptability. And I'm seeing it with the EdD, these professional doctorates who are working in jobs like a physiotherapist who works at the Purcell School, which is a junior music school for 12 to 16-year-olds, and she is doing something to try and change the institutional mindset that makes children practice 6 hours a day and get RSI and find they can't have a career in music. So what this physiotherapist is doing is developing a way to reduce repetitive strain injuries, sort of put herself out of a job by changing the practice and the mindset within that institution, being paid by that institution to enact, to research, to bring theory and practice together to develop new knowledge. And that's the thing, knowledge creation and changing jobs. This is my fourth career. I come from a family of 5 in a little country town you won't hear or have heard of in Australia. None of the rest of my family went to university. How did I get out? Long story. But actually, the idea of knowledge creation and creating pathways that are as yet unknown is absolutely key. One last example, a narrative from India where businessmen were going out of business, just the models weren't working. And so someone came up with this idea of frugal creativity, how to work with very few materials, very few resources to get a maximum change of practice. And that, there is an example of thinking, don't just say creative, which creativity are we speaking of? And then you multiply the impact of authoring ideas, having ideas that will enact change, lifelong, wide.
Lifelong. Well, I would love to hear from your personal story. And in November, I will be at Cambridge University launching our latest book. It's called Leapfrogging Sustainability in Emerging Markets Perspective, together with the governor and Steve Evans from the Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge University. So I will be reaching out to you then. Jochen, you at McKinsey must be dealing with this all the time. What are some guidance that you can provide to workers affected by technological disruption?
I would say, of course, each individual takes or should take responsibility for his or her own destiny. But just to leave workers and employees by themselves, I think will not resolve the problem. I think it's a shared responsibility. It's actually a responsibility, of course, that is with the individual, but it's also with employers, and it's with society and government, right? And I think everyone has to contribute his, her share to make this transition and this dynamic development of the labor market work. So individuals, of course, they need to be ready to change. They need to basically embark on this lifelong journey of learning. They need to actually take self-responsibility and steer and self-direct their lives. I think that's the responsibility of each individual. But then without, let's say, providing opportunities, providing educational infrastructure and platforms from an employer side, I think it's just not possible. I think from an employer side, there should also be the responsibility to create the awareness, to proactively direct open opportunities and provide educational services to employees. And then from a government side, I would also say that there needs to be I would say certain support to build up this infrastructure, right? To incentivize education, secondary education, lifelong learning. but then also provide a matching process, because what we will see is in some areas we will have obsolete a workforce that is very valuable, and we need to actually transition that workforce to new job, new sectors. And I think also here these matching mechanisms, matching platforms need to be provided by governmental institutions. So, of course, as I said, I believe every individual has an important role to play, needs to be self-responsible, but without having the whole system and all players cooperate in this kind of environment, it would not work.
Sorry, my microphone was muted. The most popular phrase in 2020. Thank you very much, panelists. What can I say? It was very insightful. We have a colleague that is actually on the call and actually has been taking notes. So we'll be having a little write-up of this. We will share it with you. With the hope then to also share it more widely. So thank you. It was truly insightful. Just to pick up on Jochen's point, indeed I think there needs to be a combination of, on the one hand, self-responsibility, and at the same time you need to have a support network. If I look at my own situation, yes, I took ownership of my own destiny, but also there were people and organizations that have truly invested in my future. Without it, you can have all the self-responsibility that you have, you get maybe nowhere. So I think you need that combination of, on the one hand, support, whether that's coming from government, whether that's coming from family, whether that's coming from an education institution or a company. It doesn't really matter, but the key is that it is, and I see that responsibility, yes. So, but you need kind of that combination, I think, of self-responsibility with a support network. And then anything is possible. And I would say as a sauce that you put over it is passion. Never give up on passion. Thank you so much, everybody. And I salute you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Cheers.